Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of this Creative Operations series on workflow automation, sponsored by globaledit. Remember to keep sending in your questions and we'll get to as many as we can in the time available. Now I'd like to welcome our speakers today, David Iscove and Brian Gavin. Thank you, Brian. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. And again, thank you to Henry Stewart for hosting us here today. I want to thank everyone in advance for spending the next hour with David and myself. Just for quick introductions, I'm the president of globaledit. Here today, we're going to be speaking about how to apply workflow automation at the realm and level of the creative operations and implementing technology into your creative workflow. I'm joined alongside David Iscove from Cella. David, very happy to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
Awesome. So as we dive into unpacking creative workflow and creative workflow automation at the realm of people, process, and technology, I wanted to quickly introduce globaledit. We are the leading enterprise solution for creative workflow management. We help brands, studios, and agencies scale the content production for visual assets. And very excited to be joined alongside David and Cella, which is an amazing agency that helps creatives realize technology within the organization. So David, again, very happy that you're here and really excited to unpack the people, process, technology trinity that we speak so much about in the creative world.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. Just real quick, for those of you that don't know, Cella is an integrated end-to-end professional services firm that's designed to drive in-house agency performance through consulting, staffing, and managed services. I've worked on both the brand side and also the vendor side prior to coming to Cella. So in my role, I have a fairly good understanding in regards to how to represent our clients in relationship to technology providers. So really happy to be here. And one thing just to note in regards to that, Cella's differentiator, all of our consultants on Cella's staff, we really offer, we're all former creative operations professionals ourselves. And so we offer a really unique blend of hands-on in-house agency and marketing operations experience, and combined with like really deep technical expertise and understanding of what enables creative marketing and digital people to thrive. We look at organizational strategy, creative operations assessments, process and project management, tech strategy and implementation, and transformation and change management and adoption to then future-proof. But it's all against the holy trinity of creative ops, being people, process, and technology.
And an amazing segue, David, about people, process, and technology. For those of us that joined in the first webinar, we spoke with Rana from Amazon Web Services, unpacking a little bit about how cloud technologies have really scaled the adoption of automation, and certainly technology being a major player within the creative space. David, pretty obvious here on the screen with people and expertise and impact being kind of the pillars to Cella. Can you just jump us into a little bit about methodology that we can walk away with at the end of this conversation about how to be effective in implementing a technology-driven approach to creative production?
Yeah, that's so. Even though the focus of this entire series is automation, and by the nature of automation, we're talking about technology and removing the dependency of human intervention. At the core, from what I've seen, those three, the people, process, and technology triumvirate process. I really have to kind of lay my hat on the importance of process beyond anything else, because any technology will only shine a light in regards to broken processes that are in place. So I'm a big believer in getting your process house in order first before being able to then implement a technology and automate. So the nature of today's conversation, we're going to talk about what you can do from an operational perspective to then be able to automate going forward.
Awesome. Let's jump right into it. And that process perspective that you talk about, I think one of the big buzzwords from today is going to be a holistic process, because part of the proven methodologies, David, that you've shown Cella is effective in implementing is around looking at the end-to-end process of production. And at globaledit, we look at it a very similar way. And I think it's interesting. On the left-hand side, you have the how globaledit looks at the creative ecosystem, and on the right-hand side, the asset lifecycle from Cella's perspective. And kind of just to draw out a few talking points about the impact that technology is having on the asset lifecycle, but also on us as creatives. We're now in an age where your technology stack is meant to be very integrated, and globaledit being at the heart of content production and asset management, oftentimes those players from a technology perspective represent a project management system, your content management system that's powering your e-commerce website, or a product information management system. And we looked at these with Rana and AWS from a technology perspective, and I kind of want to shift it with today's focus being on process focus. David, the asset lifecycle, it starts so far before the image or the video or any piece of creative is even produced. And I think you have a really nice way of looking at what is the asset lifecycle and why is it important to look at it in different stages.
That's absolutely right. When we consider the asset lifecycle, we have to account for all of the upstream portions and inputs that go into the creation of the asset way before the asset is created. You know, I think there's this misnomer that people assume that, you know, the asset lifecycle begins at the point at which, you know, the camera shutter clicks, you know, or, you know, the designer's clicking, you know, open in, you know, his creative application. But it's really important to look at all of the planning and strategy that goes into the creation of our assets, so as to make the production of those assets all the more efficient and effective. So from a technology perspective, if we're thinking about that entire incorporating both the planning all the way through production and beyond, we are looking at different technology systems that play a role. Like in the case of retail, product information management, the data feeds that actually you know, position the asset for identity, project management systems, enterprise project management. That's your planning and strategy in regards to, do we have the resources to deliver against the request for this creative asset? Studio production management and other production tools, whether that be photo operations or creative content, the actual production, the weeds themselves. And then we go into DAM, the historic definition of DAM being library repository of finalized assets, but it's also important to look at in terms of how DAM can address work in progress content as well as distribution of finals. And then publishing through web content management systems or your CMS. And then, but what's also most important is the end phase of the asset. We need to account for analytics and how the assets are performing, because at that point, if we're able to capture and measure the performance of the asset, that then goes back to inform the strategy. And thus we create this loop of continuous improvement where we're constantly iterating, constantly getting better, constantly getting more effective and more efficient.
And the key piece you mentioned, David, that I want to just kind of come back to is, if we can measure it, we can improve it. If you build it, they will come, right? And us as creatives, the whole goal of having this holistic approach isn't to take on additional responsibility or need to have to worry about all these systems, but is actually the end game to us as content producers. It's producing higher quality content. Maybe you're a little less stressed out about your workload because things are a little bit more efficient. And ultimately, and this is sort of an underrepresented portion of this slide here, which is the end consumer benefit, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about towards the end of our presentation, but the huge benefactor or beneficiary in this asset lifecycle and the holistic approach to your systems being managed is your consumer having such a better experience. So,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, if the consumer's not happy, then you're not in business. Period. So when we talk about the asset lifecycle, we're talking about constant improvement, continuous improvement towards efficiency. You know, that then leads into, you know, how do we actually produce more and more content at scale effectively with quality, and that's where automation comes into play.
So let's take a look a little bit about foundation of creating content. We're going to kind of bypass a little bit of the upfront data components and maybe the downstream distribution. But on the right-hand side, we have what looks like a bunch of systems being daisy chained together, but it's actually to help describe the foundation for creating content at scale. And we're going to look at a lot of the great methodologies that Cella has employed about defining a workflow and how to standardize. But these 6 steps, if there's 3 takeaways from today, these 6 steps might be one thing I would write down, which is having a defined workflow, because it gets back to, if the workflow is defined, it can be measured. Creating the responsibilities. We all that are joining us today and that will listen to this webinar, we're not all the same contributor to the organization from a creative or technology or marketing standpoint. We all have different responsibilities. And then how do I actually, and this gets down to steps 4, 5, and 6, move through task management and efficient asset management, aka file management, to get myself to a review and approved asset as quickly as possible. And globaledit is at the heart of that set of responsibilities, with certainly benefiting from upfront workflow definition and known sets of responsibilities around the whole ecosystem of that asset and the life cycle that David just talked about. So David, go ahead, David.
Yeah, well, I mean, to your point, like when we talk about automation, I mean, we need to talk about like laying the groundwork before, get your house in order before we actually then turn on the machines. And I mean, when we do talk about automation, I mean, like, yes, we're attempting to reduce human intervention, but the way we do that is by predetermining and standardizing the way we approach work operationally. It's so crucial to get your house in order even before considering letting the machines take over. This is, I think people like have this, this very kind of exciting, the thought of automation is so exciting to people, but it's super important to stabilize your approach to work, even stabilize your technology before you then flip the switch to let the machines take over. And so it's important to look at what do we need to do from an operational perspective to then improve our ability to automate our own workflows. I mean, even if we're managing those ourselves independently today.
Absolutely, and I think that's is so revealing and head scratching for me, which is we're, as creative producers, the content is going out the door today. It's going onto the website. The consumer is ingesting it and interacting with it. But I think a lot of, David, what you've helped me think about is, are we doing it the best way possible? Are we giving the best experience to our consumer or to our team members, who ultimately, when folks are happy in the organization, I would think the quality of content and the quality of output improves as well. So that get the house in order, it seems like if we have 6 steps to start to get the house in order from a production standpoint, you have kind of standardized these steps and can walk us through what each one of them are and maybe what some of the responsibilities are of these creative phases that are pretty crucial for each organization or type of content to potentially consider.
Yeah, I mean, so what you see on the screen, like these are the standard phases that exist for any type of job type that we see that has a certain level of complexity. I mean, obviously we get into different approaches when we talk about agile creative, but the majority of creative output follows these phases, no matter what sector you're in or what brand you're in. And one of the first steps in improving any operation or process is identifying the best way of performing a particular task, and then developing a standard work procedure for everyone to follow. A standard work procedure, that's the result of organizing tasks in the best sequence of steps to make the best use of people, equipment, tools, and various materials. And this is the standard work procedure. That's the best way to ensure performance consistency. And when we document that standard, it increases the likelihood that people will follow it, and it will be consistent, which is critical to achieving high quality output. I mean, this standard procedure serves as a roadmap, and if we don't have that roadmap, how do we know how to get where we're going? You know, the approach to this standard procedure is intended to allow creatives to be creative, you know, and provide a framework and guidelines to allow them to do what they do best, you know, and be creative as opposed to managing tasks. And when we look at when we standardize our processes and then automate those where it's available to automate, that's when we're achieving optimal performance, you know, higher productivity, you know, and bottom line profits.
Absolutely. David, I'm curious, you know, coming back to people, process, and technology, the technology doesn't really have a say in whether these phases happen, and I think the process automatically follows. But how are you finding it most beneficial when organizations are adopting this more structured creative process to get the buy-in of the contributors and leadership? And I guess it's to say, how do you get buy-in from the whole company, if you will, to move to this type of structured approach? Because I think having worked on implementing software for many different brands, sometimes that buy-in and that change management can be somewhat difficult, because change is the unknown, and change is also a potential risk if us as creatives are already really taxed for time and taxed for any breathing room to look at improving or changing how a particular production carries out. So curious, David, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 looks very simple on paper, but what are some of the ways that you're finding that brands are able to effectively implement this within their organization?
Well, it at the end of the day, it comes down to pain.
Yeah.
You know, like at some point, everybody, if you don't adopt a standard work procedure, you will be inundated with so much pain and so much exhaustion that you either fully burn out, or you know, you come to a point at which you know, it's bottom of the barrel, and you need to seek out another solution. You know, ideally, people will then really kind of get out of their way and say, okay, what I'm doing is not working. I need to actually kind of think of different approaches, at which there are so many different variables and factors in regards to then get buy-in appropriately. I mean, that's a whole webinar in and of itself, as far as, you know, ROI on the technology and stuff like that, you know. But I think at the end of the day, pain, but then putting in this you know, a standard operating procedure allows you to report effectively on your overall output. And so when we put in procedure, when we put in this framework, it's actually not Big Brother watching you, or like, you know, your hands are tied, you have to do this. This is actually the best way to actually create the argument for additional resources. You know, if you can show that you are fully overutilized, or you don't have the capacity to deliver against the you know, the requirements, having a standard framework like this is your best tool up your sleeve to then show and justify the need for additional resources.
I love it. And I know we're going to look at the prioritization framework that can be very objective in how it's prioritized. One more question before we move on is every organization going to have to run on these 6 steps, or does every piece of content run on these 6 steps? I'm curious, just does number 4, implementation, sometimes being the most important creative phase to focus on, or actually there may not even be an implementation phase based on some of the content that you produce?
I mean, it gets to the tiering of job types, and we'll talk about that in a moment, you know. But you know, this is the total framework for your high complex, you know, integrated campaigns with multiple deliverables associated with it. Tier 2 and Tier 3 content that is more kind of lightweight in nature, you may be able to kind of bypass certain aspects of this, or like there's different weight on each one. But in general, every deliverable type follows a general arc that you see here.
Cool. Let's dive into some of the details. at the framework level and then and the ability to measure it. So to give some examples of having an effective framework and having known creative phases with technology helping to support the creative process and leveraging a tool like globaledit, you actually have the ability to really visualize what are the workflow steps, where are the bottlenecks based upon the prioritization framework that we're going to look at in the next slide, and ultimately identify which parts of the creative workflow you want to put into an automation stream. And automation doesn't need to be complex and need to be things that are outside our vocabulary. It can be certain mundane tasks like assigning team members to specific project tasks or project deliverables based upon the information that exists within your project management system. That might be assign my retoucher his or her weekly workload based upon the upcoming due dates that the project management system is aware about. So I think what's so cool about having a defined workflow is it leads to greater creative focus on higher, and we talked about this with Rana as well with AWS, you get to focus on higher valued tasks or output because the systems more or less are doing the administrative work.
Yeah, and I just want to add, Brian, that task assignment and workflow automation is where we're seeing the biggest entry point for creative operations to take advantage of automation in general. We'll talk about metadata in a little bit, and that's great. There's huge importance in automating aspects of metadata as well, and I think that was kind of like the first kind of the first like little hint of automation within creative operations. It's like, oh, AI and metadata, I can do that. But I got to say that task assignment and the automation of workflows is what we're seeing is the most adopted entry point to automate, where you have a task assigned to a particular user. That could be a recurring task over time, like you said. This designer every week has a certain task. And automation is as easy as something like the designer completes their task, the project then moves on to the next task assigned to another user. That is automation in and of itself.
Exactly.
This is a huge opportunity where people can start taking advantage of it.
And I love that the simplicity of automation is what we're focused on. The AI and the machine learning, awesome opportunity. I think technology-wise, the systems are ready to help support that. But it can be as simple as notify folks downstream when my work is completed. Yep. So, David, we talked a little bit about the creative phases 1 through 6, but now it's how do we standardize the work intake to help support the upfront processes? And it seems like there's a few key areas to really think about and the benefits that they can have as a result of that.
Yeah, I liken this to parenting. Kids thrive better when they have structure, and creatives do too. It's the same thing with standard operating procedures. You know exactly how to execute work effectively, and it's the framework that allows you to have the freedom to push the envelope on your creative brain. And if you're tracking the administration of procedure, you're not using the side of your brain that you need to be creative. And so all of the framework here is intended to get the administration, the management tasks out of the way so that we can truly be creative. And it's a standard operating procedure that begins with work intake, how we're receiving work incoming to the agency or to ourselves. That is I would argue like one of the most important steps to get right in order to then affect all of the downstream steps and phases. Oh, we lost you, Brian.
And if I can have greater clarity and higher quality output as a contributor, sorry, didn't mean to get muted here. The beautiful part of working from home while we do these webinars. So, David, the framework is really helpful. Help us understand a little bit about how to go about evaluating this framework and what goes into the framework altogether? Because it looks like it can be very objective as the way you've broken it down.
Yeah, so projects differ, and I'm sorry, I don't know if it was you or me, Brian, that was choppy there for a little bit, but we'll power through. Projects differ in complexity, effort, the time it takes, the business impact, and as a result, not all projects should be treated the same, and nor should they be reported on equally. Like, we've got different levels of intake, review, and different processes. Your processes should scale based on the project's need. And at Cella, we identify 3 primary categories and standards of work. Tier 1 being your highly conceptual work, your big campaigns. Tier 2, the execution of that work, or previously created ideas, concepts, or campaigns across multiple deliverables and channels. And then Tier 3, just pure production work, or edits and revisions to existing creative. And when you actually approach your work with a classification system, that ensures that projects receive the appropriate level of effort that they require. You're assigning the appropriate level of creative direction, senior leadership reviews, in-person client presentation, and that enables the team to allocate adequate resources to certain projects and then fast track other projects. And there actually is a formula that can be set up at the point of intake that asks the appropriate questions to then classify the work across low, medium, high levels of complexity. And as a result of that classification, we then can all of the downstream processes pivot accordingly.
And I think this is so cool because this is the framework for measurement, which, as you helped us understand, if we can measure each of the creative outputs, and there's certainly not all creative outputs are created equal, each tier of content and each of those phases that you helped us understand, those, by being able to measure those, it's ultimately about efficiency. And I think that's the second buzzword, to being holistic, is it's all about having efficiency. Measurement at this level of detail is about creating greater efficiency for the organization, and certainly efficiency also means a better consumer experience. So let's take a look at one particular example, which is in the file management space, in the DAM world that globaledit plays, and ultimately by having a prioritization framework and having a creative process that's defined, your asset flow in and out of your DAM, how the team members participate in those key tasks, be it art direction, approvals, retouching, metadata enrichment, those defined steps allow you to create triggers and actions. And that's a key part of what globaledit has really been focused on, is having workflow automation recipes that support getting through the creative process as consistently as possible. So often we hear our creative deliverables are different every time, but the process of producing them is the same. And so I think from a file management perspective, this framework, David, that's so powerful, goes beyond just having a defined workflow. It's measuring how you produce your assets and how you can ultimately be more efficient. And so this does lead to greater efficiency. And I think there's a few areas to talk about, David, and I'm curious to hear from your perspective. Having greater ROI may be in the creative process, but greater ROI may also be on the marketing side, where it's greater ROI of what your marketing dollars yield in terms of retained revenue, or small changes in the creative process, like reducing the amount of revisions. So often we hear, yeah, we go through 2 or 3 rounds of review and approval strictly because the right input or collaboration isn't happening along the way of those creative assets being produced, or probably worse off, creative and marketing aren't all aware about the content that's being produced at the time in which it's being conceptualized and planned on, or it's actually being produced and brought into the studio. So I think the last point, you have a happier user, you have a happier audience. That's all of our goal. But automation and process definition really is about how we can be more efficient.
And
David,
that's another, I just want to jump in. That's another area, like approval workflows in particular, is another huge area where we've seen easy entry points to automation. You know, because, you know, in-house agencies or in-house creative, you're producing so much content, but again, oftentimes if we have a standard work procedure, the people that actually need to review the content are standardized as well, you know. And so what we can do is actually create approval workflows that scale in complexity based on the tier of the work, you know. So tier 1 content might have you know, these different stage gates where it has to go to your art director, creative director, back to the client, etc., legal even potentially, versus, you know, tier 2 and tier 3, we may be able to leapfrog some of that, you know, and bypass different approval, different stage gates. But this is another just similar to the way we talked about task workflows and automating that to trigger that. Approval workflows also are a very easy entry point to increasing efficiency and speeding up your overall process.
And so that I don't go too far into the cave, David, how do you know when you reached a point of maximum efficiency, or are we constantly looking back to the prioritization framework to keep us grounded in where we focus in our creative process for efficiency and how far we focus in those particular areas like task workflow or approval workflows? What's that guiding principle to know we've made the impact that we want, and we can kind of lessen the focus, if you will, from a audits perspective and a change management to implement the right process?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm laughing because, you know, I don't think it ever stops. You know, like maximizing, there is no cap to maximizing efficiency, and you know, hopefully we don't kill ourselves over it, you know, but there is a cap against the resources that you currently have, you know, in terms of how efficient the current resources can be. But the entirety of remaining competitive and you know, living in today's world of creative operations does require continuous audit, continuous self-reflection to look at different ways that you can optimize and bring in more efficiency to your operations, so that as a brand you can benefit from that and compete on a level that other brands are. You know, unfortunately we're moving so fast, and I wish that we could kind of say, okay, just get to this point and you're done. But we live in the world of the need for continuous improvement.
And
evolve or die, unfortunately. It's horrible, but it's like, that's the truth. Yeah.
I think if we're doing our job, which is looking at the metrics, looking at the reporting, and I know we're going to look at a little bit of the reporting ideas in just a few slides, is that between the tangential feedback that we're getting from all of the teams and certainly our audience, our consumer, but we're also reviewing our metrics regularly, we're reviewing our efficiency regularly, it's going to help us understand where to continually focus and reprioritize our efforts. So you mentioned, you know, there are very simplistic workflows that can be automated and changed on, and now I think to go to two areas where certainly there is a big opportunity to be leveraging technology. It's in the aspects of how metadata gets applied within the asset workflows. We certainly here at globaledit see metadata is coming out of the studios and out of those captures that are happening from potential freelancers or on location, and metadata is born at the time of capture, but it also exists upstream in other systems like David mentioned, and it's a continual process of altering, improving, and enriching those assets so that your metadata, which is sort of the backbone of how you find your assets, is continually improved. To go back to what was just 1 minute ago, a little bit, you know, comical, is it is about continuous improvements. David, there's a lot of other benefits that metadata has within the organization. You see it beyond just it helping in the work in progress. Can you share a little bit about other areas that you're finding metadata is helping to improve the organization?
Well, metadata is essential, without a doubt. I live and breathe metadata a little obsessively.
Yeah.
Obviously, like incoherent metadata, or even worse, lack of metadata, that becomes a major challenge for companies, for which image searchability is business critical. And I would argue that image searchability is business critical for everybody. The discoverability of digital media is at the core of successful media management, and a DAM solution, it's only as good as the data that it's managing. Now, that being said, so in regards to artificial intelligence approaches to metadata, this is where you are really using machines to apply descriptive metadata. So in this image, red scarf, white shoes, black pants, etc. And that's really kind of this kind of promise of having artificial intelligence apply metadata was really kind of the first really exciting area of where automation within creative operations was going. But I have to say that I think it's now somewhat of an afterthought. What is being prioritized beyond descriptive metadata is proprietary taxonomy metadata that is unique to the business, like SKU information, like division, segment, business unit, etc. Unfortunately, artificial intelligence and machine learning can't do that yet, but really where we can there are still areas of opportunity in terms of automating that information, but it comes more so from integrating with upstream systems that manage those elements of data, as opposed to just the turning on the AI to just capture descriptive information. So I think artificial intelligence, in terms of its approach to metadata, it absolutely is being used, but it's not within creative operations. It's not. I haven't seen it fully embraced yet, as much as say like workflow triggers in terms of adopting that.
And you mentioned the integrations piece. So automation, from a task perspective, from a review and approval perspective, and metadata, like you mentioned, those descriptor components, those description points of the product are coming from other systems, like a project management system or a product information management system, where the integration capabilities of 21st century technology, if you will, is that it is meant to be super simple. Certainly there are a lot of smart folks that make this happen, but it's a reality in a world that we live in where two systems can have discrete information but have mutual benefit to one another, and ultimately that leads to a little bit or a lot of efficiency in the creative process. And I know in our first webinar we talked a little bit about what integration and automation did from the accounting standpoint of invoice generation. Well, on the creative side, it has such a huge impact to a lot of the core phases that David, you've outlined for us earlier, which is getting content requested, getting content created, approved, and ultimately delivered to our consumer. And when we have that holistic view, we can start to look at our reporting of how efficient are we in each of these core areas of production. So David, I'm going to kind of use this slide as a transition into.
Brian, if I could just say one thing real quick, just while we're on this slide. So bottom line, I think there are three primary use cases in terms of how do integrations make creative operations more efficient. It's data feeds to deliver proprietary taxonomy needs, status visibility, to provide an understanding to all stakeholders where a project is at within its current life cycle. And then the third piece is that providing the ability for users to remain in their application of choice. So if I'm a creative and I'm in Photoshop every day, I don't want to have to jump into another project management system just to see what I need to work on. Let me stay in Photoshop and have the task assigned to me get pushed directly in there. And so these are the primary use cases for integration that we see.
and I appreciate calling those out, the data piece being so key to having smarter assets. Status is certainly, and that's something that within globaledit we've adopted in a big way, which is within our the project management component of globaledit. Creatives can actually mark their tasks and their workflows as complete. That goes and updates the marketing team who's working within a project management system, be it Airtable or Workfront or Monday, that within their system of choice. And I think that's so key, is system of choice. Within the system of choice that the marketing team is using to manage their components and their deliverables, globaledit and that project management system are actually providing those status updates through the handshake of the integration that exists.
Yeah.
So David, this is the most crucial piece in my belief, which is once you've measured it, you can report on the efficiencies, reporting on the efficiencies of the production or the campaign in its entirety.
Yeah. Through like reporting your the details of the tactical execution managed in whatever application you're using to execute it, that should summarize and confirm, whether you're aligned with your overall marketing strategy and then business requirements. Like that's the end goal, that we're trying to get to in terms of understanding from a creative operations perspective, how am I aligned to marketing strategy, and how is marketing strategy then aligned to business goals? And this really enables the strategic measurement by reporting on all overall trends in various categories applied to each piece of content. And what you can now start to see is how those trends align to your strategic goals. And then from, in terms of, creative ops being primarily a subset of marketing ops, you can then see that, okay, do we have sufficient content for each stage of the marketing funnel that we are trying to deliver against? And you may discover, for instance, that you've got, lots of great content aimed, a particular audience segment at the beginning of the sales cycle, but very little for the same group when they reach the decision-making phase. And that's where I'm really, the benefit of reporting is to go from the micro and how the micro then reinforces the macro, and then the other way as well. With reporting, you're going to be able to identify, gaps, and you're going to make sure that you're ensuring that you're always able to deliver the right content to the right person at the right time.
Similarly to the creative process that you helped us understand what the prioritization framework is meant to help support, there's also a metrics prioritization and a metrics strategy that goes from the entire company strategy, David, like you mentioned, all the way down to how within creative ops, a subset of marketing ops, how are we leveraging the data that we have access to be more efficient? Yeah,
and meaningful metrics are the key to transitioning from just gut-based, emotional-driven creative to data-driven creative, data-driven insights, and like you can't improve anything without measuring it. We've talked about that before, and there's a formula to kind of get to the point at which you determine what you need to measure. You need to look at what are the inputs to the reports that you need, and those inputs really kind of like focus on three main areas. Who's performing the work? Not even, down to the end user, but like that end user is a member of this group, this team, this division, this business unit, etc. The project, the type of work they're doing, the job type, whether this is print work or digital, etc. And then at the end of the day, the level of effort. And unfortunately, that's really only determined through time tracking. We have a lot of resistance in regards to creatives not wanting to track time, but similar to kind of like the argument for framework that I provided before, this is not Big Brother watching you. This is your best friend in getting the resources you need to actually fulfill the creative that is being asked of you. Awesome.
So David, I want to shift gears a little bit from the creative upfront production process to talk a little bit about the downstream consumer side and trends that we're seeing and how content is leveraged. And your on the cutting edge of how content's being optimized and some of the platforms that are being used once the creative is available to be consumed.
Yeah, I mean, we've entered the world of hyper personalization from a marketing perspective. Where brands are now advertising and targeting directly to individual consumers based on a granular level of segmentation of user types. Like the days of creating a radio spot and then airing it at 6 p.m. in rush hour traffic, hoping that just as many ears would listen to it as possible. That's gone.
Yep.
And we're now in this world where targeted ads are the norm. But how do you scale to deliver the creative that's required to deliver for every human on the planet, basically? And new technologies have emerged to respond to that. And that gets into a platform technology type that is called creative management platforms, which support dynamic content optimization. And this technology uses algorithms basically to select specific creative elements on the fly. You have a data source and data feed based on customer information, and then the technology picks the best combination of creative to put in front of a viewer. So what ends up happening now is that our creative deliverables are more template based, and we're using technology to automate the actual composition of the creative on the fly based on each individual user.
And the CMP can support all of the digital or analog channels that we are producing content for and kind of relevant to us as content producers. The CMP platform can scale all access to content, as I understand, David. You're seeing this.
Exactly. I mean, so in order to fulfill the need for hyper personalization, you obviously need to serve a huge variety of content pieces, again, designed for individual users based on a pre-established marketing strategy. And you cannot produce that type of personalized content through manual design methods today or historic creative approaches. So with CMPs, this is really where, like, CMP is where design and creativity meets artificial intelligence. And it's really delivering on the concept of programmatic creative. Which refers to the set of advertising technologies that add speed, scale, and automation to the creative process. So, I mean, you input strategy and business rules, design master templated files, and then let the machines do the scaling and the iterations and all of the variants that are required.
And I think this is so relevant for the folks that are here today as content producers, content creators, and technologists and marketing folks. The ability to be effective in the dynamic ability to serve up content relies on access to a good source of truth, that single source of truth, and an upfront creative process that ultimately is efficient enough to keep up with how much content is changing after it's been initially captured. So I think CMP does a lot for us post creation of the asset, and it's a lot to do with, I think, personalization. And that was a big buzzword that we spoke about in our first webinar, which is, how do I give content to my end consumer in the most fit way possible that reaches that person directly to who they are and how to speak to them in the moment that they are seeing the content that's being served up to them. So walk us through some of the key points that you see the CMP platform enacting within organizations that are leveraging them now.
Well, bottom line, when you use a CMP, even the smallest of in-house teams become a design ad factory, basically. And when we use AI in the context of design, we're creating smart automation, which means that individual teams can produce like countless display ad variations for multi-market, multi-audience campaigns. And I mean, like, localization is a huge benefit of a CMP. And without it, the creation aspect of programmatic creative is almost impossible.
So let's see, where does dynamic content fit into the process? Because upfront, for folks that are in the studio, and then downstream folks that are actually leveraging these tools, they all sit on the same plane of process.
Yeah, exactly. Like the framework is the same. Whether you used like AI to automate creation of ad versus manual, the framework of process is exactly the same, which is what you see in the slide here. But a smart scaling tool, I mean, basically just enables the production of ads quickly and in high volume via the power of automation. So a single designer can create thousands of different formats, sizes, and variations from a single master creative, and that's where in the hot pink you're seeing the significant reduction of effort. And this smart scaling approach also uses algorithms that learn, and you've got optimization, A/B testing built into it, so that you're continuously improving as well. And the bottom line too is that the designer doesn't have to write any code or undertake any sort of painstaking repetitive design tasks to deliver this.
And that's important because when you're sitting in a place where content is in such large scale being produced at a very fast pace, we need to, and we talked about, do I always have the ability to optimize? It's not auto optimize always, but I think when you have this holistic approach, it is a little bit about letting the engine tune itself. And there's kind of the three core areas when you look at it, from serving the ads to creative execution to the data that is the backbone to our creative, but also to how we serve up content and what content we serve up.
Yeah. Optimization is made simple through automated production and scaling to create new ad versions for A/B testing, and that's reinforced from the real-time publishing features of the CMP. And so this means you can quickly enhance like poorly performing ads without the laborious process of taking it down and then re-exporting itself. And the best thing about analytics and optimization being in one platform is that both performance marketers and designers can see live data. And this results in no long lead times between analysis and creative decisions, which ultimately at the end of the day saves money. And on top of that, designers can be proactive themselves in making decisions about their designs based on data that they're seeing directly supplied from the tool. And because the designers can see the results happen because the optimization and the analytics is occurring in the same tool that they're using to create these variants. Muted again.
So David, we're about 10 minutes. Sorry about that.
No.
David, we're about 10 minutes to the hour. So I want to look at some of the examples and the impact that you've seen us have in some of the organizations that you've worked with. So first one I want to look at from an ad perspective, how does scaling in this example really help us reach a greater audience?
Exactly. So, a scaling tool like enables the production of ads and formats of ads of every channel required through automation. And so a single designer can create thousands of different formats, sizes, and variations from a single master. And again, this variation is done with pixel perfect resolution, and the designer, and no technical requirements on the designer's part, so the designer doesn't need to write any code or undertake any sort of really laborious design manual labor to actually produce these variants.
When you say no code, it literally means no code, and it looks a little bit something like this, if I had to imagine, David.
Yeah, so this is an example from a marketing automation platform where you're delivering outbound, creative content via email, where you're really basically taking on. When we talked about the business logic that goes into these tools, you still need business intelligence to put parameters around business rules. But once those rules are there, the tool will actually select the creative on the fly for the user. And you're basically creating, like, the logic is decision trees of if this then that statements, basically.
And what's so interesting here is one of the trigger is when the product is jewelry, and you mentioned that tangential metadata that's being applied to the assets, knowing whether that photo is a piece of jewelry or is in a specific product line, makes automation and scale such as this possible. So it's pretty powerful and is a 360 view that when you look at it in this perspective, the impact that myself in the creative team, in the digital asset management role that is responsible for proper taxonomy, it actually makes these technology systems
enabled
and personalization possible. So it's every team working together makes this whole engine work. So one more example, or a couple more examples, David, to look at here, which I'd love for you to touch on a little bit about how the ad was changed in this perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, this is just an example that within within an ad, you have a variety of areas which can respond to dynamic updates. It's not just swap this ad for this ad. You know, sky's the limit in regards to like how many unique individual objects within the creative can respond based on the targeted individual that we're trying to approach.
This was my favorite example, David. I'd love last example for today, and then we're going to start to transition into some Q&A. Walk us through what was happening. With
I mean, so here's an example of targeting based on geographic data. So if you're currently living, if the consumer's currently living in Seattle and it's raining, the ad could actually, you know, have rain going on in the background, you know, or let's say that you're Spanish speaking first language, that message will actually be translated into your first language. And, you know, that's the delivery of the personalized message. So artificial intelligence takes all of these inputs, basically who the customer data is that we're in the segment that we're targeting, what are the master creative templates that we can leverage to understand where each consumer is in their customer journey and deliver the most relevant piece of content to that consumer at any given time.
Awesome. So this is the natural question that I'm asking myself, which is, how do I get started? So David, any specific tips as we close out the hour and are going to transition into some Q&A about the best way for someone on the line today who may be overwhelmed or is extremely excited, but certainly realizes that there's an opportunity to be more efficient?
Yeah, I mean, so this is I know it's a lot of information, and but I'm a big believer in partnerships. Obviously, you need to partner with your analytics team or IT group to determine like what data is available and how accessible it is to start. But what we're really seeing from a creative operations perspective is that there's I mean, within a greater marketing org, brands and organizations are taking advantage of what we call growth hacking. And that falls under the category of growth marketing, where you're creating pods of different user types, where, you know, that could be a creative, somebody within, you know, customer data, you know, product design, et cetera, to then iterate and create these rapid experiments. And what you're doing is like, what we're seeing is like more and more of these rapid experimentation approaches to marketing to then see how you can hack growth and really like what idea or experiment leads to viable growth and then go down that route. We're not seeing like the days of producing months and months spent producing a campaign and then just like launching it and hoping that it does well. Just doesn't exist anymore. It's going the way of the dinosaur. So that's a very exciting new area of organizational approach that we see, growth hacking, growth marketing. But educate yourself from you know, on what's possible from a strategic perspective. You know, what do you want to accomplish? What's in line with your brand identity? You know, and then as always, feel free to reach out. I mean, shameless plug for Cella. Like, we've helped numerous clients navigate like uncharted waters of DCO and CMP. So, you know, even though it's very technical and very data driven, we can help it be less intimidating.
Awesome. David, I do want to take this time to also thank you. You, in the last hour, have taught me, and I think you and I went through these slides a couple times before we got on today. And even today, I'm still learning so much about where we are in terms of intelligent content and creating efficient workflows. And I think one takeaway is this was the future of workflow. David, you've helped me understand that the future is actually now. And we are already in this moment. And for all of us here, we should be taking advantage of structured creative process, a framework for measurement, and certainly the technologies that help us reach our consumer in a more personalized way.
I hope that I've shown that there's a variety of different entry points between, like when we talk about just automation, there are certain things that can be done that are very simplistic, and there are all the way like certain things that are like really, really data and technology dependent. So there are multiple ways of different entry points for depending on the level of sophistication of your brand.
Awesome. So this concludes the speaking portion of our webinar. There are several questions that have come in that I do want to make sure I take the time to answer. So just to be respectful of folks' time, I know we're at 2 o'clock or just after the hour now. We're going to run about 5 minutes over, and I'm going to open up for the first set of questions. And David, thank you so much for helping us with these answers.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to Henry Stewart for putting this whole track together.
Absolutely, and yeah, major thank you to Jeanette. So we're going to run through 3 questions. We're going to stick on the line for about 5 extra minutes. Anyone who's asked a question, and there were several, we will definitely make sure they get answered. But David, the first question that came in, and this was early on in the presentation, which was, if the workflow can be defined, it can be managed. Talk to us a little bit about, with a defined workflow, how do you actually manage it? Is it about the reporting, or how do I actually manage workflows once I have defined them?
Well, it's important to create the framework that I talked about before, you know, and so starting with a templated based approach to your typical deliverable, and which includes plan duration, for example, an order of tasks that are required to fulfill all of the deliverables, along with plan duration for each of those tasks. And I'm a big believer in time tracking to then measure how you're deviating from what is planned there. But it starts with a template, and at the core of it, it's about this framework for creating a repeatable approach to delivering content, and then seeing where you're struggling or where you're going off the rails a little bit.
Awesome. Next question. This is specifically around the approvals portion of the workflow that we spoke about, David. Are there some example KPIs or measurements that we might look at if we were focused specifically on how to manage and approve or improve the approval stages of our workflow?
Rounds of revision is the biggest one. Rounds of revision, time per revision or time per proof, you know, that there are a number of KPIs associated with workflows in general. You know, like time to produce content and overall level of effort, efficiency. But rounds of revisions are the biggest one that we're seeing specifically related to review and approval.
Okay, awesome.
We can provide a little bit more. I'll follow up with some of these questions after to provide a little bit more detail too.
Thanks so much, David. And just to be respectful of everyone's time, we're now at the 5 after 2 o'clock Eastern time here. So I'm going to wrap up the Q&A. The last question, which was asked several times, which is, can I receive a copy of this presentation? Absolutely. Everyone who has joined us today and folks that couldn't join us will receive a copy of this recorded webinar. Myself and David, we included our contact information. Please, I think the how do I get started, we can't emphasize enough, talking to experts like globaledit and like Cella are the best way to help you get started. Thank you everyone. Thank you again to Henry Stewart for hosting us today, and a major thank you, David, for your time and amazing wealth of knowledge.
My pleasure. Thanks for everybody tuning in. Really appreciate you guys, you know, sharing your day with us, and reach out if you have any questions. Happy to help.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.